Emily had always been a woman of quiet strength, the kind of person who carried her burdens without complaint. To the outside world, she was composed, graceful even, but beneath that serene facade lay a heart that had been battered by love and loss. Her life had not always been shrouded in sorrow. There had been moments of light, of happiness so overwhelming that she once believed it would last forever. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. She had known love in its purest, most consuming form, a love that made the world feel infinite and safe. It had been the kind of love that poets wrote about, the kind that made her believe in destiny. And yet, in a cruel twist, it was taken from her, leaving a hollow space in her chest that no amount of time or distraction could fill. People often told Emily that she was strong, that she had survived so much and still managed to carry on. But they did not see the nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the memories that played like an unending reel in her mind. They did not hear the silence that followed her wherever she went, the absence of laughter that once filled her world, the missing warmth of arms that had once held her close. Some wounds never truly heal. They merely become a part of you, a quiet ache that lingers beneath every smile, every conversation, every attempt to move forward. She had tried, of course. She had forced herself to walk through the motions of life, to engage in small talk, to meet new people who could never truly understand the depth of what she had lost. But the past had a way of clinging to her, whispering in the quiet moments, reminding her of all that had been stolen. There were days when she felt like a ghost, existing in a world that no longer felt like her own. And yet, despite the weight of it all, she carried on, because that was what people did. They endured, even when their hearts were broken beyond repair. But deep down, Emily knew some love stories did not end with a happy conclusion. Some were simply left unfinished, echoing in the spaces between what was and what could have been. The rain drummed softly against the window pane as Ethan sat in the dimly lit apartment, his fingers absently tracing the rim of his coffee cup. It had been months since he had last seen Emily, yet her presence lingered in every corner of his mind. He had convinced himself that time would dull the ache, that the memories of her laughter, the warmth of her touch, and the way she had once looked at him as if he were her entire world would eventually fade. But love, true love, did not simply disappear. It rooted itself in the soul, an unshakable force that neither distance nor time could erase. Ethan had never been the kind of man who believed in fate. He had always thought that love was a choice, a conscious decision two people made to stay and fight for each other. But with Emily, it had never been a choice. It had been inevitable. From the moment they met, there had been an unspoken understanding between them, as if their souls had known each other long before their bodies did. He had loved her with a certainty that defied logic, that made him believe in something greater than himself. And that was precisely why losing her had nearly destroyed him. The night she walked away haunted him still. He had watched her leave, his voice trapped in his throat, his feet refusing to move, even as every fiber of his being screamed for him to chase after her. But pride was a cruel thing. It had kept him rooted to the spot, had silenced the words he so desperately needed to say. Now, those words sat like stones in his chest, too late, too useless. He replayed that moment in his mind endlessly, searching for the exact second when everything had gone wrong, when the love they had fought so hard for had begun to slip through his fingers like sand. He had tried to move on, to bury himself in work, in mindless distractions, in fleeting empty conversations with people who would never come close to being Emily. But nothing filled the void. The world had lost its color, its meaning. The city that once felt alive now seemed cold and indifferent, each street corner reminding him of a memory he could never relive. Love was supposed to heal, to be the one thing that made life bearable. But in its absence, all Ethan felt was the crushing weight of regret. Perhaps in another life, they would find their way back to each other. Perhaps in a different time, in a different version of themselves, they would get the ending they deserved. But in this life, in this cruel and unforgiving reality, all he had were the memories and the unbearable truth that some love stories were never meant to last. And yet, despite everything, he would hold on to that love, no matter how much it hurt. Because loving Emily, even in her absence, was the only thing that still felt real. Ethan had always believed that love, once lost, was impossible to reclaim. Yet, as he stood outside the familiar brownstone apartment, his heart pounding against his ribs, he couldn't ignore the small flicker of hope burning in his chest. It had been nearly a year since Emily had left, and in all that time, he had convinced himself that she was gone for good. He had tried to erase her from his life, from his thoughts, from his heart. But no matter how hard he tried, she remained, woven into the fabric of his soul, an unrelenting presence he could never escape. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, he had finally mustered the courage to do what he should have done months ago: fight for her. He didn't know if she would listen, if she would even open the door, but he owed it to himself to try. He owed it to the love they had shared, to the memories that had refused to fade. His breath hitched as he lifted his hand, hesitating for only a moment before knocking firmly against the door. The silence that followed was deafening. Seconds stretched into eternity before the door creaked open, revealing Emily standing there, her expression unreadable. The sight of her stole the air from his lungs. She was just as beautiful as he remembered, though there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of their history pressing down on them like an unseen force. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something fragile, something uncertain. He swallowed hard. "I needed to see you." She sighed, her fingers gripping the doorframe as if she needed something to hold on to. "It's been a long time." "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, searching for the right words, the ones he had rehearsed countless times in his mind. "I should have come sooner. I should have." He exhaled sharply. "I made a mistake, Emily. I let my pride, my fear, get in the way, and I lost you because of it." She looked away, biting her lip. "Ethan? I know I have no right to ask for anything," he interrupted, his voice raw with emotion. "But I just need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." Emily let out a shaky breath, her gaze meeting his for the first time in what felt like forever. "You hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do you have any idea how much?" His chest tightened. "I do. And I hate myself for it." He stepped closer, desperate to close the distance between them. "But if there's even the slightest chance, just one small piece of you that still feels what we had, tell me. And I swear, I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Silence stretched between them again, but this time it was different. Because in Emily's eyes, beneath all the pain and hesitation, Ethan saw it, the tiniest flicker of hope. Ethan had always imagined that if he ever saw Emily again, it would be under different circumstances. He had pictured it 100 different ways. Maybe he'd run into her at a coffee shop, or she'd call him out of the blue one night, or perhaps fate would intervene and bring them back together in some poetic, cinematic way. But as he sat in the dimly lit hospital waiting room, his hands clenched into fists, he realized that reality was far crueler than anything he could have anticipated. Emily had been in an accident, a car crash. The words had sliced through him like a blade when he got the call. He hadn't even thought. He just ran out of his apartment, hailed a cab, and made his way to the hospital as fast as humanly possible. Now he sat there, staring at the double doors of the ICU, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him she was going to be okay. Minutes felt like hours. Every time a doctor or nurse walked by, his heart leapt into his throat. But no one stopped to give him any news. The uncertainty was killing him. His mind kept replaying their last conversation over and over again. The way she had looked at him, the hesitation in her voice when she told him he had hurt her, the flicker of hope he thought he had seen in her eyes. Was there a chance for them? Would they have had time to fix everything if this hadn't happened? Ethan? His head snapped up at the sound of his name. It was Claire, Emily's best friend. She looked exhausted, her face pale and her eyes swollen from crying. "How is she?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire hesitated, and his stomach twisted into knots. "She's stable," she finally said, and Ethan felt like he could breathe again. "But it was bad, Ethan. She lost a lot of blood. She hasn't woken up yet." He swallowed hard, nodding as he tried to process her words. Stable. That was good, right? That meant she had a chance. But the fact that she hadn't woken up made his chest tighten with fear. Can I see her? He asked. Claire hesitated again. Ethan, I don't know if that's a good idea. I need to see her, he said more firmly this time. Please. She let out a quiet sigh before nodding toward the doors. Room 314, but be quick. Ethan didn't waste another second. He pushed through the doors and made his way down the hallway, his heart pounding with every step. When he finally reached her room, he had to take a deep breath before stepping inside. Emily lay there, pale and fragile against the stark white sheets, an IV in her arm and bandages wrapped around her forehead. Seeing her like this, so still, so vulnerable, sent a fresh wave of pain crashing over him. He moved to her bedside, gently taking her hand in his. Emily, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. And for the first time in a long time, he prayed. He prayed that she would wake up, that he would get another chance, that fate wouldn't be so cruel as to take her away from him before he had the chance to make things right. The days that followed felt like a blur for Ethan. He barely left Emily's bedside, unwilling to leave her alone for even a moment. Every beep of the machines monitoring her vitals, every slight twitch of her fingers, sent his heart racing with both hope and fear. The doctors assured him that she was stable, but stability wasn't enough. He needed her to wake up. He needed to see those eyes again, to hear her voice, to tell her everything he had been too much of a coward to say before. Claire came by every morning, bringing him coffee and forcing him to eat something. She'd kill you if she saw you like this, she murmured one day, handing him a sandwich. Ethan gave her a weak smile. Then I guess I'll have to wait until she wakes up so she can yell at me properly. But as the hours stretched into days, doubt started creeping in. What if she didn't wake up? What if she never got the chance to be angry at him, to forgive him? Or worse, what if she woke up and didn't want anything to do with him? He ran a hand through his unkempt hair, exhaustion weighing him down. Then, on the fifth night, something changed. It was just past midnight. The hospital was quiet, save for the hum of machines and the occasional footsteps in the hallway. Ethan sat slumped in the chair beside her bed, his fingers loosely entwined with hers, his eyes heavy with sleep. Then he felt it, a slight squeeze. His eyes snapped open, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at her hand, unsure if he had imagined it. Then it happened again, a faint, deliberate pressure around his fingers. Emily? His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried all the desperation, all the hope, all the love he had been holding in. A soft groan escaped her lips, her fingers twitching again. Then, after what felt like an eternity, her eyelids fluttered open. Her gaze was unfocused at first, confused, but then those familiar eyes he had spent so many nights dreaming about, locked onto his. Ethan, her voice was weak, hoarse, but it was real. She was here. She was awake. Relief, overwhelming and unstoppable, crashed over him. He let out a shaky breath, pressing her hand to his lips. I'm here, he whispered, voice breaking. I never left.